Let's look at the economic support now that is flowing from the federal and state governments. Joining me is the Chief Economist at the Blueprint Institute, Stephen Hamilton. Stephen, thanks very much for your time. That you've written a piece in the Sydney Morning Herald today about the fact that while it's not called JobKeeper, while the name isn't like that original scheme, it will serve a similar purpose, work as similarly effectively. Talk us through it.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are very confused about this, right? We've had Sally McManus, the ACTU secretary, out and about saying, they should have brought back JobKeeper. That's a bit too much focus on what this thing is called. What we should be really focused on is how it works. And this scheme is indeed designed to work pretty similar to JobKeeper, even though it doesn't quite look that way on the surface. So workers get the same $750 a week that they got under JobKeeper, but rather than going through their employer, it goes directly from Services Australia if they've lost hours. And the other point is businesses are also given separate support, right? So they're free to reduce the hours of their employees, so those employees can then get the payment, and those employers will still get some, 40% of their prior pandemic payroll costs covered under the scheme. So at the end of the day, workers are kept, subsidised, businesses are kept subsidised, and businesses don't get support unless they keep their workers at least on the books.
So that was one of the key strengths of the original scheme, was that the link between the employer and the employee was maintained through JobKeeper. You're saying because in this program, they don't receive the cash flow boost unless they keep their employment or job numbers up, their payroll remains the same, they don't receive the same sort of boost that they otherwise would.
That's right. So the payroll, the boost they get is 40% of their payroll, but it's 40% of what their payroll was last quarter, right? So even if they lay everyone off and their payroll's zero, they're still going to get a subsidy equal to 40% of what their payroll was before. Right? So the only real difference between the two schemes is that the money for the worker goes direct rather than through the business, right? If the business lays off a single person, just one, they lose that 40% subsidy to cover their prior payroll costs. So there's a pretty strong incentive, I would have thought, to maintain those employees on the books. And as you said, maintain that link, which is something that a lot of people praise JobKeeper for.
And you also argue that the flexibility makes it more fit for purpose.
That's right. So the JobKeeper scheme was pretty clunky, right? It got thrown together in March. At the end of the day, it did the job. I think there's no doubt about that. But it came with a bunch of compromises, right? It was set in place for whole quarters, and eligibility was determined based on whole quarters, or at one point, what businesses thought their revenue would do. This scheme is much more nimble and much more flexible, right? So it depends on businesses' revenues right now, today, right? So there's not going to be a lot of overpayments. And it's targeted to local areas, right? So it's not just all businesses across the whole country, no matter what they're experiencing. It's businesses in New South Wales, which are the ones that are predominantly feeling the brunt of these lockdowns. So I would expect it to be more efficient, more flexible. It can be switched off once the lockdowns lift. And so in that sense, I actually think it's probably better placed than JobKeeper was to handle the current situation.
You've been critical of the vaccination program, particularly the acquisition phase. The government was flat-footed, didn't spread its bets enough.
Yeah.
Are those early mistakes now essentially being felt as Sydney remains in lockdown, at least for the next month?
Well, there's no doubt about that, right? So it was very clear, even December 2020, that the vaccine program wasn't quite up to the task, right? So when other countries had ordered multiple, duplicates of their population over and over from different manufacturers, we were significantly less well served, right? So I think that was clear a very long time ago, and I've been writing about it in the newspapers for 6 months, saying exactly that. So nothing that I'm seeing now is surprising. I think the only surprising thing is the really unfortunate situation with the AstraZeneca vaccine and the hesitancy that is kind of surrounding that, because we have plenty of doses of that vaccine. It's very effective. The clotting issue is extremely minor, right? So I have really, very strong support for the government rethinking its approach around that vaccine, because if everyone in Sydney had that AstraZeneca vaccine today, this lockdown would be over, right? So we need to get there as quickly as we can.
Stephen Hamilton, Chief Economist at the Blueprint Institute, I very much appreciate your insights as always. Thanks.